This video is a paid promotion for Nvidia. I was given the game and told to stare at walls, which I gladly accepted, forgetting how much I hate survival horror.
Our team, we can handle it here.
The Metro series has always put me in an awkward position, because I really hate jump scares, and this game has a lot of those. But also, I love pretty graphics, so this series repeatedly lures me in and then beats me with a stick. But then it gives me something nice to look at again, and all is forgiven. Until the next jump scare. Oh, no, don't get me, no. The latest in this confusing series is Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition. But Philip, I hear you cry. Metro Exodus only came out in 2019 and is already one of the best looking games ever. It even had ray tracing already. How could the Enhanced Edition possibly improve on that? Well, that's what I'll be investigating in this video. But Philip, I hear you cry again. Didn't Digital Foundry already cover this? Yeah, they did. I'm here to make sure they didn't miss anything. If you enjoy following the graphical progress that computers are making, then Metro Exodus is an exciting title to learn about. Let me explain. When Metro Exodus was first released in 2019, it showcased the very best that the old consoles were capable of. It came out at the very end of the console generation, meaning that the developers had plenty of time to master the hardware and to find clever ways of squeezing as much out of it as possible. But with this game, it just happened to represent something bigger than that as well. These graphical tricks and shortcuts, employed by the older consoles, represented the best ways we had found, up to that point, of mimicking reality in video games. The reflections and lighting in those games weren't being done properly. They were done using clever tricks, all of which came with their own limitations. But this would all change with the advent of ray tracing, which is when those effects are done properly. Back in 2019, PC users already had ray tracing capable PCs in the form of the GeForce RTX 2000 series. Users with an RTX card could enable ray tracing in this game, swapping out the older methods of simulating shadows and lighting for a more accurate ray traced approach. Fast forward to today and things have advanced a lot. Ray tracing has gone from being a niche to being supported on all new graphics cards and consoles. And to celebrate this advancement in computer tech, the team has reworked the game from the ground up to embrace ray tracing. And this is what the Enhanced Edition is. It is the first AAA title to require ray tracing support, and this time around, not only does it use it to simulate light realistically, but it does so beautifully. So what is the ray tracing doing here exactly? Judging from the ray traced games released so far, you might think it means reflective puddles. I think these are used because the effect of ray tracing here is obvious and in your face, but Exodus uses the power of ray tracing for something a bit different. Something more subtle, but beautiful in its own way. Oh no, it's just my wife. Exodus uses millions of rays to simulate the lighting. Lighting is a big problem for games, because it's difficult to get right. However, Exodus has managed it. To understand the complications, let's look at what light does. You have light coming from the sun and from light bulbs, which does brighten up the areas that this light hits. But the light doesn't stop there, it then bounces off these surfaces and onto anything else it hits nearby, and then again off those things and onto everything else and so on. As you can imagine, this quickly results in billions and billions of calculations. Not a problem for reality, but for video games trying to do this while maintaining 60 FPS, this can be an issue. But you can't not have light bounces because otherwise it would be really hard to see indoors, because all shadows would be pitch black. Here's what a room would look like if light didn't bounce. Yeah, it doesn't look right, does it? Look around your room right now and see how much direct sunlight you can actually see. The chances are that most of the room, bathroom or basement that you're currently sitting in is being lit indirectly by bounce lighting instead, or from light bulbs. So this is a quantum leap for graphics in video games. You can no longer think of an environment as being lights and surfaces, because with ray-traced global illumination, any surface can potentially become a new light source, if it's lit up brightly enough already. And whereas lights used to always be points of light, they can now be any size and shape they please, and the shadows in the scene will react accordingly. But bounce lighting doesn't just brighten areas up, it also paints them with the colours of the surfaces the light has already hit. Which is why, if you have a bright red thing in the sunlight, it will make the rest of the room appear reddish in colour too. Here's an excellent example of what difference correctly coloured lighting can make. This is Metro without ray tracing, and here it is with ray tracing. Notice how the ray tracing doesn't just more realistically light the interior up more brightly closer to where the window is, It also applies a warmer, more orangey glow to the wall, since the light it's receiving has already bounced off something orangey in colour. It's a subtle change, but it makes the scene look more cohesive and realistic. And if we switch back to the older methods again, it highlights the shortcomings of how we used to do lighting in games. I mean, that's an extreme example. The sad reality is that most of the time, the effect is more subtle than that. And especially so in a sewer setting. But even if you don't noticeably notice it, it's still there, and it's making the environment look right instead of being slightly wrong in a video gamey kind of way. This is what ray-traced global illumination does, by firing millions of rays out all over the place, every frame, to ensure that the wall over there looks just right. Let's compare the three versions of Exodus. This one here is using old techniques, no ray tracing at all. On its own, this appears quite acceptable. But again, moving across to ray tracing, it highlights the problems with older methods. This is ray tracing with one bounce of lighting, and suddenly you can see what the fake techniques lacked. Adding ray tracing to it better matches the lighting to what's going on in the environment at that time. It lights this wall here from the sunlight that's bouncing off the ground, which the non-ray traced method doesn't seem able to do. And while the older version lights the whole interior up evenly, ray tracing lights the areas closest to the sunlight up the most and plunges the far side into darkness. Now, are you ready for the new ray tracing method? Here it is. This is the result of infinite light bounces rather than just one, and all these bounces apply the light and colour to each new surface that they bounce off. The result is a much warmer, much brighter looking environment. The whole room now has this lovely orangey glow because of the warmer colour of the sand and walls, which are bouncing off each other endlessly to produce an even warmer looking image. But all these light bounces everywhere results in softer shadows than you might be used to seeing in a video game. We have spent so long judging game graphics on the quality of their shadows that this is a problem, because there are no defined shadows here, since lighting can reach virtually every part of the room from so many different directions, cancelling any potential shadows out.
Our team, we can handle it here.
You can still see darker patches around the bases of objects and behind this oil drum by the door, but for the most part the lighting is so soft that there's no sign of any kind of clear-cut shadows that we're used to seeing in games. At least not until I fire my gun, which creates such a bright light that it overpowers the bounce lighting and produces one of those good old sharp shadows that we're a lot more accustomed to seeing in games. Now to ask the hard questions. Does this mean that the old method of ray tracing was wrong? And is there a possibility of even better ray tracing in the future? Well, I don't think the old method of ray tracing was wrong, merely restricted in its number of light bounces. The resulting atmosphere and look was faithful to the non-ray traced style, which made direct comparisons between the older versions of the game easier than, say, between the two different ray traced versions of it. Because for this enhanced edition, the developers deliberately went through the game and designed it with ray tracing in mind. So whereas the first implementation of ray tracing was merely to replace older techniques with a more accurate system, this enhanced edition is intended to look nicer as well, which I certainly think it does, even if it does make some parts of the game much brighter than it was originally. As for the possibility of even better ray tracing in the future, yes, I'm sure it's possible. There is already a limitation with the enhanced edition, and it's that, while it can do infinite bounces, it's restricted to lighting the scene one bounce at a time. And by one bounce at a time, I mean up to one bounce per pixel per frame. Just one bounce a frame would be terrible. You can see this best when turning a lamp on or off. It isn't instant. It looks as though the lamp is warming up and cooling down, as the light bounces rapidly approach, yet never quite reach infinite accuracy. It's understandable why it's done this way. It gives you the best of both worlds, the beauty of infinite bounces, but the frame rate impact of just doing one bounce at a time. Ray tracing in the enhanced edition can be set to normal, high, or ultra. Normal shoots rays at quarter resolution, high is checkerboarded, and ultra is native. Indeed, one ray per pixel per frame. But in the grand scale of things, even one ray per pixel is tiny. It used to take hundreds of rays per pixel to eliminate grain from renders, so it's testament to the quality of Metro's denoising filters that the screen isn't constantly bathed in aggressive, speckled grain. You can still sometimes spot it a bit in the darker areas, like this bit here, but the effect is tame and actually rather pleasant if you ask me. But this is still a limitation with current ray tracing. We could get around this by either firing more rays per pixel, or to reach frame rates so high that this shimmering would no longer be visible. But no matter what you set it to, it still only does one bounce per frame, which means that there's a delay before things are lit correctly, especially if lights are suddenly turned on or off. And now in super slow motion. So in theory, while each additional bounce makes the scene look better, it will never reach perfect lighting accuracy, because that would require infinite light bounces. The lighting in Exodus will simply get close enough to perfection that you can't tell the difference anymore. In some cases, this can take just 3 to 4 frames, in others, 20 to 30. So the limitation really is how long it takes for our computers to render that many frames. So what if we run this game at native 5K with ray tracing? As you can see, with a low frame rate, it takes a really long time for all the bounce lighting to react to change. Turning the light on isn't so bad, but switching it off again takes many seconds before the surroundings finally look right again. But if we drop the resolution down to just 1080p, which produces a much faster frame rate, the time taken gets much shorter. And here's a comparison between the two. The reason this recording was cut off early was because I actually thought the lighting had fully updated on the 5K version. It's only in comparison to the 1080p version that I can see that the lighting still has some way to go, even as much as 4 seconds later. So in short, the faster your frame rate, the faster the bounce lighting in Exodus will update. Which is why upscaling techniques like DLSS exist, which uses AI to upscale visuals to a higher resolution, hopefully resulting in higher frame rates, better graphical fidelity, and smooth looking anti-aliasing. And this feature is another reason why Metro Exodus is so interesting, because it's one of the few games to have used multiple versions of this technology. Exodus back in 2019 used DLSS 1, and Enhanced Edition uses the newer, improved DLSS 2. Let's compare them. DLSS 1 notoriously made everything look blobby. Sure, it removed jagged edges, and yes, it ran much faster than native resolution, but it resulted in an artificial looking image, without the same texture or feel as the original. It looks almost like a watercolour. You can see it also manages to make straight lines look kind of hand-drawn, and there's a lot of sharpening around the edges of things. Not a great result. And to top it all off, it automatically disables below 1440p resolution, which took me far too long to realise in my testing. But, as we all know by now already, DLSS 2 is substantially better. These comparisons speak for themselves. It's much better at resolving fine lines and sub-pixel details. Looking at this distant bridge, there's not a hint of aliasing in sight. Despite rendering at a lower resolution, DLSS 2 manages a significantly better result than native resolution here. And the same applies across most of the screen, especially on any man-made structures. Let's be honest, since DLSS 2, it's been a no-brainer to enable it whenever it's been available in games. For it to provide image quality so similar to that of native, but at much higher frame rates, makes it incredibly hard not to recommend. I want to make that clear because I'm now going to go off on a lengthy tangent about tree branches, which isn't a serious issue, but is an aspect that I believe DLSS could perform better at. Take a look at them here. They don't even look like the same models. Native retains a lot more of the thinner branches, but also a bit more pixelation too. DLSS 2 takes a different approach, masking out the smaller branches but producing a much less aliased result. I don't know which bit of the DLSS pipeline is causing this difference compared with native. Is it because it's using a lower base resolution? Or is it from the AI upscaling part of the process? I don't know. It reminds me a bit of DLSS 1 actually, but on a far more localized, less noticeable scale. I would say that the trees in native are rendered more faithfully to how they're meant to look. I ran up to one to get a closer look and they do indeed have that tufty bit at the top that DLSS likes to reduce down to just a couple of jagged branches. This is a fascinating topic. I get the impression that conventional anti-aliasing methods have a tendency to make thin details appear thicker than they're supposed to be. But DLSS is doing the opposite of that here, hiding sub-pixel details in the trees too aggressively. Perhaps it's because these models, at this distance, rely on transparency, which might be something that DLSS doesn't really know how to resolve. Regardless, I'm interested to check out DLSS in Red Dead Redemption 2 once it's implemented, because I can't think of a game more in need of a good anti-aliasing solution, plus it will be a great test for DLSS 2 to have to render so much foliage all over the place. But until then, tree branch rant over. Despite this, I wouldn't hesitate to enable DLSS in this game. You're talking like double the frame rate, more responsive global illumination, and, for the most part, better image quality, especially around the edges of things. If that means that distant trees look less branchy from time to time, then that will be my burden to bear. But which version of DLSS should you choose? Quality looks the best, then as you drop down the settings towards ultra performance, the image quality degrades, but your frame rates improve further. Generally at 1080p you'd want to use the quality setting, then at higher resolutions like 4K you'd go down to something like performance. Just for the fun of it, I ran at ultra performance at 1080p, which I think makes it run at a resolution like 360p, and I was impressed by how well the image held up. It still didn't look blurry, even when upscaling from an ultra-low resolution. The underlying checkerboard pattern became visible on most things though, and shimmering was noticeable on thin details. And any movement developed a halo artifact behind it, so it's not like I'd recommend using ultra-performance setting at a low resolution like 1080p, but you can see from the footage here that the image is still coherent, if not ideal. And last I swapped it out for the even newer DLSS 2.2. This edition has been known to effectively cut down on the tails behind small objects in games like Death Stranding. Unfortunately, in Metro Exodus, 2.2 didn't seem to make much of a difference, though admittedly very few things in this game caused this effect in the first place, and it isn't very noticeable. While we're on the topic of frame rate improvements, there are other options as well, like VRS. VRS drops the resolution that certain things are drawn at where it thinks you won't notice. It sounds great in theory and promised to use clever tricks to deliver a free frame rate boost, but unfortunately in Metro I did immediately notice it in the form of severe pixelation around my lighter. I thought, ugh, and turned it off again. In its defense, in the game's first sequence, the pixelation is made worse by the blobby face mask that you're wearing, so the effect isn't quite so bad in later chapters or in lighter environments. But so what? This feature pixelates stuff. Just look at this cobweb burning. It's disgusting. Sure, you could turn VRS down to just 2 times to make it less disgusting, or you could turn it off completely and have no disgustingness at all. I'll be honest, I really didn't bother doing more with this feature than that. As far as the features in Metro Exodus go, it's not on the same level as the likes of Raytracing or DLSS, and let's be honest, if you can even run the Enhanced Edition, you probably don't need the minuscule frame rate boost that VRS brings to the table. I'm saying all this to acknowledge the feature's presence, but it really didn't interest me in the slightest. But getting back to the topic of ray tracing, and how long it takes for bounce lighting to update, it entirely depends on your frame rate, and whether you're going to spend your time in this game flicking lights on and off and studying the result. No doubt, as computers get more powerful and as frame rates increase, the time this fade in and fade out takes will drop. So yeah, I just see this Enhanced Edition as the best iteration of the technology yet, and as the graphical bar the developers have set for the new generation of consoles and graphical hardware to achieve moving forward. And impressive it is. Smaller objects, which used to be lit rather flatly, now receive the same high quality of lighting as the rest of the scene does. These bottles, although not directly lit up from the lamp, still receive light from the lamp from the bounces coming from the table and pages nearby. And these boxes of eye care previously looked flat and lit from all directions equally. But ray tracing lights this side up with lighting that's bounced off the book pages and subtly darkens the table around the object's bases. And this is how it would be in real life too. In short, ray tracing will ensure that, no matter the lighting conditions, that our boxes of farts in and a flatuum will be lit correctly. About time. Now this game has ray traced reflections, so I took a trip to this beautiful place to have a good look at them. This zone acts as a welcome respite from all of the other jump scare laden chapters in the game, and I felt that here I could just sit back and admire the After a lengthy scene, I found myself in this blissful paradise. All I needed to do was to step out far enough into the water to view the reflections. Just a little further. Anyway, I eventually reached here and went to test the ray traced reflections. Does it work on these sorts of surfaces? No. It turns out that Metro is not the easiest of games to find reflective surfaces. Failing to find reflections there, I went somewhere else for the water reflections. And where better than the desert? I must admit, this is when the game's appeal really clicked for me, as I trekked over seemingly endless sand dunes, with nothing around me but rolling tumbleweed and the sound of a gentle breeze and... Eventually I reached reflective water, and this one has reflections. Look down and the screen space reflections make way for something else of varying quality. I'm still unsure what's going on here. It's not a direct, one-for-one reflection of the world. It's like a low-resolution version of it that excludes certain details, like some of the surface textures and models. And it generates a weird distortion thing if I move the camera around like so. And I hate to parrot Digital Foundry here, but while it doesn't look perfect, it does seem to do the job of disguising the lack of screen space reflections. At a glance it's fine, and most surfaces are ripply enough to mask the reflections limitations anyway. Speaking of ripples, check out these bad boys. It's like Trespasser all over again. And I mean that in a good way. I've not had this much fun with ripples since Morrowind. And again, I mean that in a good way. In conclusion, Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition is a pretty game, with some advanced graphical features. The original game set a high bar to beat, but the ray-traced versions have only built further on the series' reputation of delivering very pretty, but depressing, looking environments. I never thought I'd say this, but testing the ray tracing has been a harrowing experience. And since every train journey in this game ends in disaster, I guess that's one more thing I can add to my phobia list.
Dad!